Hi, it's Richard here from Intelligent Advisor IT Consulting, and I'd like to welcome you and say thank you for joining us in this training session about Oracle Intelligent Advisor Decision Services. This training is broken up into 13 different modules. This is the first module. We will cover in this class everything you need to know to successfully create, edit, model, test, and deploy decision services. This training class was recorded at the beginning of the second quarter 2022, so at the beginning of April. So the product as you see it in the demos which follow our presentations and in the screenshots reflect the functionality that was available in the 22A release. Where appropriate, I will also provide you with suggestions as to what may be coming. Of course, as you are well aware, I do not work for and I do not represent Oracle Corporation in any way, shape, or form. So these are just my suggestions as to what may be around the corner, or it comes from publicly available information. And under no circumstances should you take this into account if you're considering purchasing Oracle Intelligent Advisor. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's take a look at what's coming up in this class, and let's begin with the first big question. What is a decision service? All through this class, I will be assuming that you have some familiarity with Oracle Intelligent Advisor concepts. I also will assume that you have a basic familiarity with the Oracle Policy Modeling tool, as well as the Oracle Intelligent Advisor Hub web application and the basic concepts around users, roles, deployments, and so forth. Where necessary, I'll add background information so that if you're a little bit shaky, you should at least still be able to get good value out of the presentations. Anyway, here's the agenda for Chapter 1. In 4 steps. This is what we're doing right now, the introduction. I'll shortly turn you over to the outline of the course so you know what's coming. Then we'll discuss the basic starting point of the class. What is a decision service and how do I make one? The slides in this first presentation will not go into any detail at all. They will simply highlight the basic concepts hiding behind the terminology of decision service. This is me, as many of you will know. My name is Richard, and I am the founder of Intelligent Advisor IT Consulting, and for many people, I'm better known as the owner and host of IntelligentAdvisor.com. I've been an Intelligent Advisor, policy automation, Haley Authority, configurator, consultant, and architect for a very long time. I also work with other technologies and was an employee of Siebel Systems way back in 1999 and beyond. And I work in both English and French. And if you want to reach out to me for whatever reason, no strings attached, just go ahead and find me on LinkedIn. So here is the course outline. Beyond this chapter, we will look at the differences with Oracle Policy Modeling. So we want you to understand that there are differences and there will be differences and there will continue to be differences. We'll look at the fundamental things that change. Then we'll move into a series of practical chapters which will discuss and describe the concept of contracts, which is something which you probably already have considered when working with Oracle Policy Modeling, but now will become a mandatory part of your activities. And then we'll move into modeling rules. Again, we'll focus on what's new, what's different, or what is going to be different when it comes to creating rules. If you're familiar with Word and Excel, you will obviously have a good start, but there are definite differences that you will need to take into account, and we'll aim to cover those off. Similarly, when we talk about modeling table rules, we'll look at how tables have changed. Compared to Word and Excel, there are some differences as well as some similarities. And in those 2 chapters, we'll also look at some fundamental differences that tell us a lot about how and why decision services were created. In the next chapter, we'll look at live mode, which you can think of as the equivalent of the debugger. We'll follow up with chapters on the REST API, which is a fundamental reason for the existence of decision services, and we'll discuss something new, the concept of objects. Objects, you can think of them in the same way as you think of entities today, but there are differences, fundamental architecture differences. We'll also talk about scope, something you may have already come across in Oracle policy modeling rules, where you have functions such as for scope and for all scope and exist scope. A similar concept exists within decision services, but it's much more hands-on, and we'll show you how that works. We'll talk about versioning so that you know the difference between saving or committing a version of a decision service in development and deploying a decision service. The next two chapters will look at how to use a decision service at the same time as using a project in Oracle Policy Modeling. A Oracle Policy Modeling project can reference a decision services, and it's one of the big selling points to be able to do this. We'll show you how to create a reference. We'll talk about some of the traps and pitfalls that you might find when you're a new user. We'll also talk about some of the advantages of this method of using this, and then we'll show you how to test them in the debugger of Oracle Policy Modeling and how to use Excel test cases. And we'll again give you a couple of tips and tricks to watch out for. Obviously, a decision service at this stage is not designed to replace Oracle Policy Modeling. And indeed, it has a different job in a sense, or it has a job which is aligned with a different scenario. So we'll look at potential use cases for decision services. This will by and large be my own opinion, or from my own experience of implementing decision services, or from discussions with my customers. Then the final chapter is we will look into the future, consider where this might be going. Again, this is my own opinion, and of course I may be completely wrong, and you can come back and tell me so much in 3 or 6 months. With the course outline out of the way, let's think about what is a decision service. And it might look a bit strange, but we're going to start with what is Oracle Policy Modeling. Oracle Policy Modeling is a mature Windows-based tool that leverages Word and Excel, offers comprehensive testing and management tools, supports multiple languages both in its user interface and indeed in the rule design, and it is essentially a fairly stable platform because it's a follow-on from version 10 or even earlier version concepts that have been modernized and brought bang up to date with facilities for managing your projects in the cloud. So essentially the concepts behind Oracle Policy Modeling haven't changed a great deal for quite some time. Now let's compare this with a decision service. As you can see in the screenshot on the right, a decision service happens in a web browser. That's the most important thing to begin with. Decision services are created, edited, tested, and managed in the hub. So they're a fairly recent addition to the different screens of the Oracle Intelligent Advisor Hub web application. As such, you'll notice that everything is pure web. Creating a project, deploying a project, editing, testing, everything happens in the web, which of course means that the way we work is going to be different. There are not going to be any Word documents, there are not going to be any Excel documents. There's a new design paradigm which we'll look at in the practical chapters when we talk about how to create rules and table rules and the like. It does offer comprehensive testing and management tools, just like Oracle Policy Modeling. So you have everything you need to perform both unit tests as well as larger test scenarios within the web application. And you have everything you need at your fingertips to be able to create versions and deploy the correct version for use. At the moment, decision services are written in English only. The only language that is supported as of today is English. Personally, I have discussed with other people, and we know that there are other languages that are very much in the pipeline. But right now, English is the only rule language available. The hub application can be displayed in many languages. You can go into the menu in the top right-hand corner of this screenshot, click the menu, and then you can choose the language that you want the user interface in. However, the rules will always be in English. So this is a brand new platform. It's going to evolve. And in fact, it has already evolved since it first appeared. So we should be braced for future modifications. However, the principles of the first 3 points should remain stable. It will be the hub in the hub application. It will be a pure web application, and it will offer comprehensive testing and management. We can assume, I think, with a high degree of certainty that other languages will be offered, but it is something new. We have to get used to the fact that this is a platform that is constantly evolving. So now that we've touched briefly on a comparison between the two, let's answer the question, what is a decision service? In many ways, it is just like a project in Oracle Policy Modeling. It has multiple goals, it has many different structured rules, and it offers a pseudo-natural language. So in that respect, it should feel fairly familiar. There are, however, some changes that we will look at in these practical chapters. It can be tested without any further tools being necessary. You can do everything you want to verify the results of your decision service, just like you verify the results of your calculations in Oracle Policy Modeling. It is possible to connect it to further tools because it's a service which has its own endpoints. So if you're someone who's familiar with web services, you can plug the web service into your documentation tools. You can plug the web service into your testing tools like Postman or SoapUI. Indeed, we'll discuss all of those a little bit later. But to perform initial unit and sort of regression testing, you don't need any further tools. And it can be managed and deployed directly from the design tool, and the versions are stored in the hub automatically, just like they are with Oracle Policy Modeling projects. But in some ways, the decision service is completely different. Number one, as of today, there is no support for interview-based projects. The key word is service. This is all about creating decision services, automating decisions that do not have a user interface, calculating benefits, establishing eligibility, giving advice. The content of the engine is going to be web services. There is no support today for interview-based projects. However, as you'll see at the bottom, it says, watch the Into the Future chapter for some other thoughts on the subject. Since there is no Word or Excel, there's no concept of documents. All rules are entered in a single work area in the web editor. If I haven't said it already, you're going to see a brief demo of this at the end of this chapter, and all the other chapters have demonstrations of the different functionalities that you'll discover in this course. It has import and export tools that use a different format. They all use the JSON format, but it allows you to move or copy projects and other elements from one hub to another. The syntax is not identical to Oracle Policy Modeling. So if you're writing rules in English, although it's very similar in a lot of cases, there are differences. And they're fundamental differences which would appear to be here to stay. They're not simply cosmetic touches that are going to change. That said, the product is quite new and there are some features that are either missing or not complete. And it's not entirely clear whether there is at this stage a desire to make the two ISO functional. So some features that you know in Oracle Policy Modeling might be missing today, and they might be missing forever, to be replaced by newer, better concepts. There are a couple of examples at the moment, which we'll discuss later on, where it's not clear at this stage whether they are missing or whether they are going to be replaced. So there is a degree of hesitation. There is a degree of uncertainty. That said, the core feature set is ready and already reasonably mature since we've gone through 3 different quarterly releases. So decision services are, to some degree, ready for prime time. Still continuing with our thoughts, A decision service is therefore, let's summarize it, a web service project that's designed on the hub directly. It's a web service that can be consumed using only a REST API, unlike Oracle Policy Modeling projects where you can choose an XML-based assess API. This is all REST-based. A web service project can be connected to an Oracle Policy Modeling project through a mechanism known as referencing. We'll talk about this in a dedicated chapter, but it's an exciting feature of decision services, which enables you to essentially outsource part of your Oracle Policy Modeling project and maintain it separately from the Oracle Policy Modeling tool. This can have distinct advantages in certain cases that we'll look at a little bit later on. The last thing we talked about in the agenda was, how do I make a decision service? Well, that was a bit of a facetious question, because when you log into the hub and go to projects, there's a great big button that says create. And if it's a brand new hub, you get a second button with a message saying, click here to create your first project. If you're running on-premise, you will need to be running a fairly recent version. 21C is the earliest, but of course, I would always recommend that you run the most recent. And your user, if you want to edit an existing decision service, will have at least author role. If you want to create or deploy the decision service, you'll need a higher role, such as manager. The new role called viewer, which was introduced in 22A, can consult the content of a project in read-only mode and can access the endpoints, so they could find out the URL for testing the decision service. But as its name suggests, it's a read-only role. So that is the end of our first presentation. We've looked at an introduction to the class. We know what's coming in terms of the outline, and we've attempted to define what a decision service is. In fact, we've tried to define it several different ways: what it isn't, what it's not, what it feels like, and what it doesn't feel like. And we've answered the simple basic question, how do I make a decision service? In the demos that follow each of the chapters, we've been using version 22A, so if you're using a later version, we'll try and add comments to this soundtrack, so if there's anything that's changed, you will be able to know the change because we'll highlight it. For now, though, I'm going to turn you over to a walkthrough of the different features that we've talked about in this presentation with a demo. So in this first demo, we're going to merely look at the big high-level pictures and questions that we asked ourselves in the chapter. So how do I get to decision services? How do I make them? And what do they basically look and feel like? All of the details will come in later chapters, but right now this is just our first foot in the swimming pool, if you will. To be able to create a decision service, obviously you need a connection to a hub, and you need to have a user which gives you at least permission to get to projects and, if necessary, either edit a project if you're going to be someone who's editing them, or if you're going to be someone who's creating them, you'll need a higher role such as manager. So I'm going to go to the Projects tab, and you can see here that in my projects list I have 2 projects currently, and I'm going to see on the right-hand side a button that says Create. And this is where it all happens. So this is the new decision service creation button. When I click the Create button, the page goes blank and I get a full editing facility. As I mentioned in the call, you have a name here. So this is the name of the decision service. Thus, of course, it helps if you can type. And you have a variety of new features that we spoke about briefly. We have no Word documents, no Excel documents. We have on the left-hand side here some tabs which we'll investigate in Chapter 3. And up here on the right, we have a variety of tools related to editing, testing, reviewing versions, and deploying and generally working with the business service. The business service itself, because it doesn't have Word or Excel, everything happens on this page. So you can see here that the content is editable, whether it be here in the first part of the page or in the second part, which is inside what is known as a blog. And you'll notice that wherever I go, we have three little dots here to help me get to editing options. And the editing options are, of course, context aware. So no matter what I'm doing, I'll get the right options if I put the cursor in the right place. In the top right-hand corner, you can see that my work is being saved as I go along. So watch this little space. If you obviously have an internet dropout, you might get an error message. You won't typically lose anything. You just have to make sure that you then reconnect to the internet so you can save it. And when you have finished, you can then return to the project list by clicking that button, and you can see the decision service is right there. And in the projects list, you have typical features such as export and change workspace. The export feature you'll be familiar with when you've been using Oracle Policy Modeling, but this time the export is a different format, as we'll talk about a little bit later on. I'll go ahead and I'll delete this decision service because I don't need it. And I return to the menu. Let's briefly take a look at another one, just to give you an example of something that has some content in it. As you can see here on the left-hand side, I have content in these two tabs, and I have rule content both above and inside these blocks. And you'll notice that I have more than one block. That's quite okay. You can have as many as you like. So there's our whistle-stop tour of decision services. If you're already getting excited about it, well, I look forward to seeing you in the next chapter.